Hello and welcome to Wine O'Clock with Lifestyling. I'm Sarah and I'm very happy to be hosting a new monthly wine feature called Wine O'Clock. We're going to be featuring once a month one of our local wineries where we'll be chatting to some of our favorite winemakers. For those of you that don't know, Lifestyling is a new online publication and we specialize in design, decor, lifestyle and culture. Being based in Cape Town, of course, we include wine in culture. And so with this new series, we'll be interviewing a winemaker, and then during the course of the month, we'll make available a limited edition wine case from that winery, which you'll be able to order from us on Lifestyling. So that'll be live on our website tomorrow. For now, we are launching today with our debut edition. We're going to be chatting to the winemaker and viticulturist from Radford Dale. Just waiting for Jacques de Klerk to join us. He's the winemaker for Radford Dale, which is a winery that's based in Stellenbosch. And we've selected them to start off with as they are one of my favorite wineries. They make really beautiful terroir-driven wines that really speak to the terroir of Stellenbosch as well as the local regions that they source their grapes from, including the Swartland. And yeah, I'm going to be chatting to Jacques de Klerk, the winemaker, just waiting for him to join the call. Jacques, are you around? Hi, there you are.
Hi, evening. Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm all right, thank you. It's been a long day, but you know, it's 1 o'clock now, right?
Exactly. So I hope you poured yourself a glass of wine.
I'm about to.
You're about to. Good.
Yeah.
You might be able to see behind me, I've substituted what's normally my art shelf. I filled it up with your wine bottles, so we have a little bit of a display, a little bit far away, but I think you can see your labels behind me.
Nice.
What are you doing
today? I'm just about to tuck into a little bit of Chenin. That's the Radford Dale Venom Chenin Blanc.
Snap.
Like, yeah. To me, this wine feels like when you've had to wear trousers all day and it's hot, and you get home and you put your shorts on. That's what this wine feels like to me.
That's a good description. Yeah, I love the Venom. I have to say the Chenin is one of my favorites. It's the kind of wine that I feel like you can drink on a Wednesday night, which is a good time for now. And it also equally goes really well with food.
Yeah, it's pretty versatile in that sense. You know, I've had it with everything from shellfish to sushi, you know, roast chicken. It just seems to work with everything.
So, where are you now? Are you at Radford Dale or are you at home?
Yeah. I've just come from the cellar. I'm in our little tasting room now. I'm sitting here, coming to you live from Stellenbosch. Cool,
that's awesome. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have a wine cellar, so I'm just in my office at home in Cape Town.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about Radford Dale. So you're based in Stellenbosch.
Yeah.
From what I understand, you're quite a team winery. You're co-founded by Alex Dale in 1998. When did you join the team, and tell us a little bit about Radford Dale?
Yeah, Radford Dale is a small to medium size winery in Stellenbosch. We make wine from various places, though. We have a winery in Stellenbosch, but we have always had the idea to source specific varieties from specific places, and that gave rise to a sort of a terroir-driven approach. So we knew from very early on that taking the approach that most people had in those days of you know, establishing an estate and then planting 19 varieties and then expecting them to all be world class, it just doesn't work, because South Africa is a very diverse place and we have much better terroir for specific things in other places. And that's been our goal, to go and search out the greatest places for particular things. And that has led us to places like Elgin for Pinot Noir, the Voorpaardenberg for Syrah, for Mediterranean style blends, as we have in the box, Black Rock, it's been the Swartland. And we've always had this kind of exploratory vibe about how we source our vineyards. You know, this is still unreleased, and it's a little bit of inside info, but we're actually making wine from as far as Prisca. I don't know if you know that.
No, I don't.
Prisca is in the Northern Cape. It's sort of halfway.
Oh, yeah.
It's sort of halfway between Bloemfontein and Uppington, and it's right there, sort of in the middle of the country.
Yeah.
There's
and are there many wines coming from there at all at the moment?
Yep, they are. There's a good friend of mine up there called Bertie Coetzee is making some really interesting wines. He's making a whole range now under his Loverland brand. And you might have seen his very edgy, funky labels. You know, the embroidery inspired labels. One that's been doing very well is his Val Camille. It's a Colombar from there, but what most people don't know is he also makes some banging cab.
Okay, awesome. Well, we have to source some of that at some point. I've never tried his wine, so it sounds really interesting. But just to go back to the terroir story, obviously that kind of comes together with what the land offers and what the weather offers and the location in terms of climate and that sort of thing. From my chat to Alex last year, he sort of spoke to me about how he's adopted more the Burgundy philosophy in winemaking rather than the Burgundy style per se, which is to focus on the terroir rather than the Bordeaux approach, which is to try to sort of make the same wine year after year, which you know, as he explained to me, takes a little bit of kind of adding things to the wine to make it taste a certain way, rather than letting the terroir speak for itself and allowing the specific vintage to kind of be adaptable based on what's happening that year. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that applies to what you do?
Sure. I mean, for me, it's very simple. If you are aiming to hit a certain style or segment and little niche in whatever market you operate in, and you reverse engineer everything back to whatever land you have, then the wine is going to take some manipulation to get it into that very little niche that you're aiming for. We've always taken the reverse approach. We've always started with the land and let the wine be itself, and then go and find the place for it, you know. But it takes lots of experience to know what is the right piece of land, what is the right terroir to eventually get you to where you want to go. It's taking a holistic view of the process and the environment and the market. You know, it's taking a sort of a step back and seeing it as a whole that gives you this perspective. Because if you're tied to one little piece of land, your land is everything, and then you farm your land, you make your wine, and then you have to make it fit into whatever niche you can operate in. You know, if you have the ability to operate in many different terroirs, in many different regions, you can go and source a particular vineyard that you believe, and it doesn't really always happen like that. You know, I've made many mistakes. But if you believe in the terroir, then you let it shine. And there's always a wholesomeness to the wine that speaks for itself, you know, and it also appeals to a large audience. You know, you don't have to go and focus on a little niche like that. If something is authentic and it's real, even if you're not a wine, you know, fundi or a guru or even a connoisseur, you don't have to be those things. You can recognize authenticity, and you can recognize this kind of wholesome character. I think most people know the difference between a processed cheese and a really artisanal, crafted kind of cheese. Most people can taste that. And that is, I think, what the greatest advantage of this kind of approach is. And then you've also got to take into account that, you know, in later years that this kind of approach has become very popular. But in 1998, the South African landscape for wine was much different. You know, you were either an estate, or you were a cooperative, or you were a producing wholesaler, such as a Distell or a whatever, you know, these big companies, that kind of thing. And there were only a handful of guys that took this approach, Neil Ellis being one. You know, Ibn Sadi had just started a few years later. And this kind of approach was very much based on the Burgundy mindset, where you have a little winery somewhere, and then you go and source the most amazing fruit that you can, and you respect the terroir, and you bottle that on its own, and you try and capture a message from a time and a place. That's the philosophy.
Absolutely. And then, so also to go with that, you speak about minimal intervention and a sort of more natural approach to winemaking. Is that also part of that same philosophy?
Absolutely. You know, if you start with this holistic view that I have mentioned, and you respect what you have and what you're working with, then you have confidence to let the wine be itself. You know, if you are always aiming to hit a little niche or a price point or a this or a that in the market, the wine takes a much more hands-on approach to make it fit in that. And that means, you know, manipulations in terms of your tannins. You're going to probably add acid. You are going to make sure that you hit a particular alcohol level. You're going to, you know, it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, you're making the market dictate to you what to do in your vineyards, and it's backwards.
Whereas what you guys do you don't add anything to your wine, so you're not adding acid, you're not adding flavorants and stuff like that.
Well, look, I mean, we don't. I'm not personally dogmatic about anything like that. If there's a force majeure, you know, now for whatever reason we get like a 2-week heat wave, and you know all the wine in the country, you know, loses all the grapes in the country loses their acidity within 2 weeks. You know, I mean, you're gonna do something, right? Or for instance, if you're farming and we get 100 mils of rain 2 weeks before harvest, I'm not going to sit there and watch the grapes rot. You know, that's not my approach. But it's important to me to have the lightest touch that I can when I'm making wine. You know, because I'm aware of the fact that every little thing that I do to the wine changes its expression. You know, because our overriding principle is that wine for us should be it's capturing a moment and a time and a variety. You know, so it's about what that variety tasted like in that place at that time, that vintage, and most of our wines tend to be low in alcohol. And that is not because, you know, we're picking for low alcohol. You know, it's only because the alcohol level coincides with this moment that we're trying to capture, this moment of freshness within the ripening process. You know, because, you know, there's so much that can happen in a week's time in terms of how the grapes develop from Monday to Sunday for a Chenin Blanc vineyard in January or early February. So much can change, and when we're talking about flavor spectrum, you're really on this kind of like continuum. So if you pick it early, it may be all like green citrus and lime, and then in the middle it gets a little bit more orange peel, and then towards the other end of the spectrum it can get very apricot peach kind of thing. So you need to find where you want to be on this continuum, and then really nail that moment in the picking time. And it doesn't, you don't really taste this in the grapes as such, but with a bit of experience, you're able to tell, like, okay, if it tastes like this now, by the time it's fermented, it's going to taste like that, and by the time we bottle, it's going to taste like that. So it only takes a little bit of experience to have this kind of this kind of long-term.
Yeah, it reminds me. I was chatting to Lucas van Landenberg last night. He did a dinner in town, and he's got a Chenin, which is famously called Trusted Gut, and he says that developing that gut sense of when to pick the grapes is everything, because if you pick them a day or two late, you can completely ruin the vintage. It just changes it so completely. Is that a big thing for you as well?
Absolutely. And you know, if you make the commitment that you're not going to or that you're not going to add anything, it becomes so much more important, because you're taking that crutch away. Whereas in the past, you would probably, a producer would probably have said, you know, if we miss the picking date by 2 days, or, you know, we don't want to work this weekend or whatever, you know, we'll just add some, we lose the acidity. Oh, but it's okay, we'll just add some more with tartaric or this kind of that. If you remove that crutch and you make a commitment to be as minimal as you can with your interventions, it makes you focus so much more, because you realize that this is your moment. Even if it's Sunday, you're going to make a plan, and you're going to make sure that you nail that little moment in the ripening to achieve what you want to do stylistically.
So you as winemaker, do you feel like your main input is in the growing process and in picking at the right time, rather than in sort of post production once the grapes have been picked? Or
I don't think that. I think that this is maybe the one of the biggest mistakes that the New World has made in terms of how we've approached winemaking. You know, we've made a distinction between viticulture and winemaking. You know, I'll make an example. In the old world, in French, there's no word for winemaker. There's no word for viticulturist. It's vigneron. And vigneron means wine grower. You know, you're a person that grows the grapes, you farm, and you make the wine. Many times you're also the guy that sells the wine, because there's a lot of those type of businesses in the old world in France, you know, that do the whole process. And the New World has taken a different model. You know, the economies of scale are different, the market is different and such. But the mistake that I think a lot of guys have made in the New World is we've separated the two, and it seems to have eroded in the New World. It's coming back, thankfully. The importance of terroir and the importance of taking a holistic approach to what you're doing. You know, when I started off, 20 years ago making wine, I was involved with many estates and different wine businesses, where the viticulturist thought that his job ended the day that the fruit was delivered to the winery, and the winemaker, never went in the vineyards. It was the two were separated from each other. And at Radford Dale, that has never been our approach. Our approach has always been to take a very holistic view of the process. And that is how you align your chosen vineyard, your chosen terroir, with where you're going stylistically with your wine.
Yeah, so that brings me to something that's a bit of a differentiation for Radford Dale, especially in South Africa, is that you're not technically a wine estate, you're a winery, and that's because you don't own the land that you farm on, but you rather either rent out or purchase grapes from blocks that you've been following for a long time. Can you tell us a little bit about that decision and how that works?
Yeah, I mean, it's not we're not unique in this approach. I think if you look at a cross section of what I would call the the newer, more progressive type of producers. You know, the guys who were, you know, a couple of years ago we would have been described as young guns, but now we're just guns, I suppose. They're all to differing different degrees or measures. They're doing the same thing. You know, we're sourcing vineyards, or we're sourcing grapes from vineyards from many places, and that kind of approach has become much more acceptable now. But when we started doing this in 1998, like I said, you know, it was a different landscape. So it takes a lot of driving. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of, you know, firm handshakes and smiles and commitments from a winery to be able to do this successfully. But I mean, we've got, you know, our shortest agreement that we have with growers is 5 years. That is the shortest amount of time that we will commit to working with a grower. And, you know, we've got commitments and agreements ranging all the way up to 20 years. You know, so it, for instance, you know, a grower that we've been working with for many years already is Joshua Hubert at Caribib. You know, we've committed to a 20-year agreement with him for a block of Gamay that we've planted on his land. You know, so it takes a long-term view to make this kind of stuff works, you know, because otherwise you're chopping and changing every year. You're buying fruit from this guy 1 year, and next you're buying that fruit. And, you know, if you also have made a commitment to not really manipulate the wine much, then there's no continuity in it. You know, then one vintage will taste completely different to the next vintage. And, you know, it's very difficult to have this continuity over vintages. So it's very, very important to prioritize those relationships with growers.
So what are some of the best regions that you feel that you're working with? I mean, I know Stellenbosch and Swartland are two of them.
Yeah, I mean, Elgin has always been special for us. Pinot and Chardonnay seem to just really work there, particularly for what we're trying to do with those two varieties. You know, in later years, we've been focusing much more on Pinot Noir from Elgin than Chardonnay, but it's the kind of place which just gets on with whatever it's doing. You know, even in the drought years, Elgin had an abundance of soil moisture and water. You know, let me say, when there were heat waves and all the picking dates were moved forward, Elgin has just always, you know, had its own. It's almost like it's its own little country up there, you know. And from Stellenbosch, it's only 30 kilometers, but the elevation change is, you know, 400 meters to where these vineyards are. And it's this particular combination of altitude, proximity to the sea, you got your maritime influence, and then the topography of the place is really special. You know, because it seems that the topography, the mountains attract clouds, and this valley is often got some cloud cover over it, and these things combine with each other. And of course, the amazing soils that you have there, you know, the diversity there is amazing. You walk for 300 meters and the soil will change 4 times, you know, it's crazy. So yeah,
and comparatively the Swartland is obviously much hotter and drier, and then you've got a lot of granite in the soil, and you're dealing with a lot of old bush vines. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Old bush vines are you know, that is partly what makes this Swartland so special. It's the kind of place where, you know, 20 years ago, everyone else was pulling out their Cinsault to plant Merlot because that was like the hottest new thing at the time. And in the Swartland, they didn't, you know, they kept their Cinsault and they kept their old vine Chenins and things when everyone else was planting Sauvignon Blanc. And that is part of what makes the Swartland so great. I think the soils are amazing. They're very, very decomposed granite, you know, whereas in Stellenbosch, we're we don't have that decomposition to the same degree. And this is what makes it special as well. And I would say the Swartland probably has more of a continental climate than most places around the Cape. You know, in most places around the Cape, yes. I mean, the proximity to the sea in places like even Stellenbosch, Paarl, that kind of thing, means that it's still a coastal Mediterranean kind of climate. Yeah. And in the Swartland, I think you've got a much more continental type of climate than anywhere else.
Yeah, so let's speak a little bit about the type of grapes that you focus on. So Alex, I mean, famously, he's got this t-shirt that says Sauvignon free since 1998. And I said to him when I met him, he's a man after my own heart, because I basically drink any wine except for Sauvignon Blanc.
Right.
And so, I mean, what I know about your wines is you focus on Chenin and Pinotage in particular as our sort of heritage grapes in South Africa. And then amongst that, also interesting varieties like Gamay Noir, which I hadn't come across in South Africa before tasting some of your wines. I think it's more common to Beaujolais in France. So tell us about the type of grapes that you select and the thinking behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't share the same view in the sense that Sauvignon Blanc is bad. I don't think that any variety is bad. I think what winemakers and what producers have done with things tend to make them a certain way. It's true that Sauvignon Blanc went through a phase that, you know, didn't really serve the grape. You know, I mean, everything was designed to be the leanest, greenest version of Sauvignon Blanc, and you know, that kind of thing becomes a competition between winemakers. You know, who can produce the greenest Sauvignon Blanc that there is. You know, and once you start to do that, then you're going down the wrong path. You know, you got to remember that people actually have to drink this stuff. So maybe it's a technical achievement, but if it doesn't taste very nice, then what's the point? You know, so. And
what I tend to find with South African Sauvignon Blancs, in particular Stellenbosch, it's so hot that they produce too much sugar, too much alcohol, then they have to throw a whole bucket full of acid in. So you end up with this wine that's high in alcohol, high in acid. I don't know. It doesn't suit my constitution very well, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's been overplanted or anything like that. You know, and planted in places where it never should have been. But you know, it takes us back to where you have to start with the terroir and plant what's suited to the terroir. But I mean, the same could be said for Pinotage, which is a variety that is very, very dear to me, as well as Chenin, and therefore we focus on those. But Pinotage has had a very, very checkered past. I think it's not a secret or a lie to say that most of the Pinotage out there today is pretty difficult to drink. But that's not the grape's fault, you know. I think it's the most misunderstood grape variety in the country. You know, it's perhaps been made to do things which it was never intended to. You know, I mean.
So what is your particular approach to Pinotage? How are you doing things differently?
Well, I think the best and the worst thing that could ever have happened to Pinotage was in 1991 when Kanonkop or Beyer Strutter actually made a Pinotage for the first time in a like a Bordeaux style, and it was awarded internationally for this unique approach and that kind of thing. And you know, I will never diss anyone's style with it, but you know, it's when you're doing something like that, the margin for error is very, very small. And it inspired a lot of other producers to do something in a similar way. And if you get that kind of thing just a hair off, then the result is not so great. Our approach with Pinotage has always been to look at its parentage. Its mother is Pinot Noir. Its father is Cinsault. And yet most people think it must do Cabernet work. That doesn't ring true for me. So we've had a lot of experience with Pinot Noir and with Cinsault, and so Pinotage was sort of was our approach with Pinotage sprouted from our experience with Pinot and Cinsault. So you know, picking early.
So you end up with a wine that's much lighter and fruitier, more along the lines of what you'd expect from Pinot Noir or Cinsault, rather than that heavy, full-bodied, high-alcohol, dark red wine.
Absolutely. Because you see, Pinotage is unique in the sense that it's a variety that ripens. Okay, when we're talking about ripening in reds, we're basically talking about three things. We're talking about a decrease in acidity. We're talking about an increase in sugar and a softening of the tannins. All right. And in most varieties, these sort of run concurrently with each other. Not with Pinotage. In Pinotage, the tannins ripen at the very end. You know, so you're left with some very hard, very square, rough kind of tannins for the whole ripening, and then at the end that seems to ripen. So, you know, if you really are aiming for that big extractive type of style, you're going to wait until it's 15% alcohol, so you can get these ripe tannins. But if you adapt your approach a little bit and you focus on softly extracting and making a lighter, juicier style wine, you can pick earlier. And that's how you make sure that you retain the natural acidity in the wine. And that is how you stop your alcohols from going to 14.5, 15. And that has really been the light bulb moment for me, you know, was when we started making Pinotage like this, was whole berry fermentation. Because it's as if you destem the grapes and you only have the berries, these berries will then sort of ferment within themselves and through a process called carbonic maceration. And it's as if you are extracting the tannin from the inside of the skin, as opposed to from the outside when you're punching it down and you're doing all these kind of very abrasive processes to the skin.
Release all the tannins from the skins right early on, right?
Yes. So this kind of carbonic maceration then gives you the advantage that it extracts the tannin from the inside and limits this very blocky, hard tannin that we were talking about with Pinotage particularly before. And it also, because of the chemistry involved, produces more esters, and this seems to lift the fruit a little bit. So what you end up with down the track is a much more perfumed, lighter, vibrant kind of wine, as opposed to the very extracted, dark, heavy styles of Pinotage that came before.
Yeah. So carbonic maceration or whole berry fermentation, that's also, it's much harder to control that process, right? Because you don't know what's going on inside the grape, or do you? How much are you able to control there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're taught to always be pumping over, and that is sort of how you make the fermenting tank homogeneous with each other. You're just going to go and you're going to draw a little sample from a sample tap and base your opinion on what's going on inside on whatever comes out of the sample tap. But in a carbonic maceration, it just doesn't work like that. So you have to actually get in and dig out some bunches, and then you've got to crush that, and that'll give you a better idea in terms of the chemistry, but also the taste and the character of the wine that's emerging from it. So yeah, I mean, it's more work, and you have to have a lot of faith, because you're not able to control things as much as you would have in a conventional fermentation. But if you start with good grapes and you work well, and you're happy that you've done everything that you can and that you should, then you have a lot more peace of mind, and you're able to just let things go after that. That's really where it's at for us, you know, and it ties in with the sort of the minimal intervention type thing as well.
And so this process also, what it lends itself to, in my mind, is these kind of reds that aren't so super heavy in tannins, they light in alcohol. So suddenly you're moving away from this kind of assumption that red wine goes with food and white wine goes without food, because what you've actually developed is some really nice, easy drinking light reds that you can drink on their own, and by the same token, more complex white wines that go really well with food.
Yeah, I think you've just nailed it there. It's this kind of distinction or categorization that we've made for ourselves, you know, in the world. That white wine is an aperitif wine. It's supposed to be simple. It's supposed to be refreshing, and that's all it is, you know. And red wines are for sitting down and for having with our dinner or whatever like that. And that's a very binary way of looking at things. I think there's so much more nuance between the two, you know. I mean, and skin contact has really helped in terms of giving the whites that we make more texture, and that is, I think, is the key between or breaking down this distinction between whites and reds. It's texture. We want our whites to have grip. We want them to have tannin. We want them to have real presence on the palate, and skin contact, and as well as lees contact, and you know, there are a bunch of things that we techniques that we can use, but they're all guided by the concept that we want to make white wines with texture. You know, we don't want just very light, very refreshing, little fruity white wines. You know, we want something that has presence. And we're trying to blur the lines a little bit between whites and reds and their versatility. And that's why I believe that Chenin, you know, is such a versatile variety, because it lends itself so well to this kind of textural focus that we've had for so long with our whites.
Yeah. So on the white side, the wines that we've selected for the case that we're going to make available to our audience on Lifestyling, we've got two of your Chenins. We've got the Vinum, which is I mean, you can call it entry level, but it's not a cheap wine, and it's a fantastic wine. I think it retails for $160 a bottle. And then the Renaissance, which is your, what do you call it? More your premium.
Yeah. I think Renaissance is our de facto flagship, because we're very much focused on Chenin. You know, we make 5 different Chenins now, and Renaissance is the pinnacle of that. So, I mean, we've never, you know, shouted about this being our flagship, but you know, if we're a Chenin specialist and this is the best Chenin we make, then I suppose that's our flagship.
And that's made also from these old bush vines, right? That I think Atkin told me are 51 years old, which is really, really old for vines.
Yeah. So in 2020, this vineyard is 51 years old, planted in 1969, and it's never been irrigated.
That's insane.
It comes from an area called the Polkadry Hills in Stellenbosch, and it's on a really, really steep slope, and the vineyard is quite large, and because of the steep slope, the bottom and the top are quite different from each other. You know, there's very little soil at the top, and so the vines really struggle there. Yields are low, and this little section of that vineyard is where Renaissance comes from. It's a very, very special parcel within this larger vineyard, and because of the struggle that these vines go through, there's so much concentration just already in the grapes. We have to do very little for it to shine. And you know, it's also the kind of place that, or the kind of terroir, which shows the vintage effect a lot. You know, in years where there's much more rainfall, you might see a different expression to when there's less rainfall. And let me tell you something, there's nothing greater to a winemaker than being able to do a vertical of 5, 6, 7, 8 vintages next to each other, and then tasting them, and then being able to see this, like, it's almost, it takes you back to that time, You know, because you read
so
it.
with the Vinum in particular, I think it was 2018 that I found like a lot more citrusy, more on the lemon side, and then the later vintages are also a little bit high in alcohol, but a little bit plusher. Is that because of the rain, and was that related to the drought?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ones that you're referring to are probably 18, being on the plusher side. 18 was a vintage that was really hot, and it was really compressed as well. You know, we basically did 10 weeks of harvesting in 7 weeks, and that was because we just had heat wave after heat wave, and you know, it wasn't the kind of summer that we've had in other years, such as 2017 and 2019, where we've got this really big diurnal diurnal difference, you know. So that means cool nights and hot days, and cool nights and hot days combined produce enable the vines to produce much more acidity in the grapes. You know, hot during the day but cool during the night is really good for pH and acidity and that kind of thing. And those tend to be the vintages that produce this very zippy, zingy, kind of lean, taut kind of white wine. And other years, you know, I mean, other years we've got the kind of conditions where it's still 30 degrees at, you know, 7 o'clock at night. You know, you're from the Cape. You know that there are nights where you can't sleep because it's too hot.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say Stellenbosch is usually about 10 degrees hotter than Cape Town.
Probably, yeah. With 10's pushing it, but close, yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You know, and other years, you know, you're standing outside on a Saturday night at 7 o'clock braaiing, and you got to put a jumper on.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So
just being cognizant of time, because we've probably only got about 15 minutes left. I would just like to run through the rest of your wines. So the third one that we're looking at is the Chardonnay, which famously the 2017 was rated in the private tasting with Tim Atkin as the best South African Chardonnay. Tell us about the length of vintages and where are you growing that?
Yeah,
I'm sad I didn't prepare a bottle of that in advance, but I'll have to have some later.
That's the one I've just opened now.
It is probably the best Chardonnay I've tasted from this country.
Yeah, look, Chardonnay is important to us. You know, one of my partners in this business, Alex Dale, he grew up in Burgundy, and so you know that Burgundian influence is very strong in our business. You know, even back in 1998, when he and Ben Radford made the first wines for Radford Dale, it was never the kind of thing that could be mistaken for like what is called a New World style. You know, I mean, it was always very pure, focused on the citrus. It was barrel fermented, yes, but it was never about the oak. It was about purity of fruit. And this is probably one of the wines that has been most consistent over all the vintages. This Chardonnay. So I mean, we pick early. Even the 2018, which was a higher alcohol vineyard, a higher alcohol vintage, is 12.5%. You know, and that doesn't seem so out of place these days. But you know,
well, comparatively, a lot of the states in Stellenbosch are making 14% easily, sometimes higher.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, it's about where you want to focus. And we want to focus with this wine on acidity, freshness, and refreshment. You know, it's supposed to be a really fresh expression of the grape. You know, Chardonnay is coming back, thankfully, but there was a time where it was all about the butter and the oak and the richness in it, and that scared a lot of people off. You know, because it was difficult to drink.
I think you almost lost the innate characteristic of a Chardonnay. All you were tasting was oak. You know, for me, when I was a younger wine drinker, I loved Chardonnay because my palate wasn't that established at that point. But I realized later on that when I thought was Chardonnay, I was actually tasting wood. And so what you guys do is dial down on that wood, and as you say in your tasting notes, which I really like, you say focus on backbone and not butter.
Yeah, and in this case, the backbone of the wine is that very taut acidity, that tension that it has in the palate, you know, and that comes from pH, and it comes from capturing that moment of freshness in the ripening spectrum, as we were talking about earlier. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Gamay Noir. As I mentioned earlier, it's a grape that comes from Burgundy in France, and you know, I think I heard at one point that there was one other estate in Pal doing a Gamay Noir, but I think at the moment you guys are the only ones producing Gamay.
Yeah, I think Radford Dale has been pivotal in the re-establishment of Gamay in South Africa. I mean, when we planted Gamay in 2017, it was the first time in 20 years that anyone has planted Gamay. And in fact, I mean, we've now been producing cuttings for the nursery from our own vines so that they can propagate more Gamay vines. You know, it's a forgotten variety, unfortunately. It's been probably it went to the brink of extinction really in the Cape. And it's a shame because, you know, we've for a long time been really committed to making lighter, refreshing styles of red wine, you know, because we were talking earlier about blurring the lines between, you know, what red wines do and what white wines do, and that's part of it, you know, making red wines that are refreshing and that you can drink on their own or with a little bowl of biltong while you're watching the rugby. That kind of thing is what we're aiming for. And Gamay is a perfect variety for this. And large parts of the Cape is, you know, it's just too hot to make good Pinot. And Gamay seems to be able to handle this kind of hot weather much better than Pinot does. So couple that with the fact that, you know, large parts of Stellenbosch has these beautiful, you know, granite soils, which is probably, you know, the closest thing that I've seen to the hills of Morgon and Chirouge and Fleury and that kind of stuff. So it's a no-brainer, you know, if you want to make light, refreshing styles of red wine in a hotter climate such as Stellenbosch, it's a perfect variety for it.
So tell us a little bit about the flavor profile, because I think a lot of people haven't really had any Gamay Noir at all.
Yeah, well, I mean, before I do that, I'll also tell you that for a long time, Gamay was one of the major varieties in Burgundy. You know, it was one of, I don't know which king it was, but he decreed, because he didn't like Gamay, he decreed that, okay, from now on, you know, the best wines can only be made from Pinot. And at which point, you know, Beaujolais became the sort of the hub for this variety. And so, yeah, it's very similar to Pinot in the sense that it's all about that juicy red berries. It's got an earthiness, but it doesn't have quite the same acidity as Pinot does. So what you get is a much more relaxed kind of wine, whereas Pinot can be very taut. It can be very like dark and earthy and have this like amazing acidity that makes it last for years and years and years. Gamay is much more relaxed and just full of reward for the drinker, you know. Lots of red berries.
Yeah, and we had a question earlier. JP was asking about the light color. So a lot of people will look at, say, your first Gamay at that color and think it's a rosé, but it's classified as a red wine. Is that just the style of making with less skin contact, or is there more to that?
It's a first Gamay is produced 100% carbonic maceration, and that means whole bunches, no crushing of the grapes, just chucking it in a container, a fermenter, and then letting it ferment. So there is less contact with the skin as you might have in a conventional fermentation. It's a lighter extraction. What I mean by extraction is how hard you are working to take the tannin out of the skin and into the wine. You know, and this wine really isn't focused on taking massive tannin out of the skins. Gamay essentially is a thin-skinned grape. You know, it's like Pinot in that sense.
Yeah.
You know, you can extract the hell out of it if you want to, but it can only give so much. But what you sacrifice when you extract so much is this really vivacious, berry-driven personality that the wine has, and that to me is its major appeal. It's this friendliness, this refreshing kind of lightness that Gamay.
And just as you've got lightness and color, you've also got lightness and alcohol. So I mean, the first vintage of Gamay that I tried was I think it was a 2018. It was 10.5%. I don't think I've ever had a decent light wine like that ever before.
It was definitely a little bit lower in alcohol than we've been doing in later years, but you know, it's about experimentation as well. You know, there's no handbook for this kind of stuff. This is not the kind of stuff that I was ever taught at Elsenburg. You know, there's very little that you can learn from books making this kind of wine. You know, you learn most of these things by just by doing. And there was a time where perhaps I was pushing things to the extreme a little bit, you know, but I was learning.
I have to say I was a big fan. I think I left the estate with 2 bottles and then I ended up ordering another 2 cases because it just became my favorite weeknight wine. You can have a bottle with dinner, no hangover. It's just light, it's refreshing. It kind of goes with anything from pizza to whatever kind of food. And it's, yeah, I think you should go there again. I love it.
Yeah, and that is with thirst specifically. That is the overriding concept of it all. You know, we want to produce wines in this thirst range that are we joke around. We call it the smashability index, and it, you know, the joke would always be like, yes, it's good wine, but how does it rate on the smashability index? And what I mean by that is like, how quickly can you finish, or how easily can you finish a bottle on your own and still be okay? You know, I mean, because I mean, some wines are just easier to drink than others, and our aim with thirst is to have this amazing drinkability where you drink a bottle and you're like, whoa, where's it gone? You know, shall we open another one? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think especially for, I mean, I'm more of a lightweight, like I'm a smaller woman. I've realized that you can only process alcohol to a certain level. So if I start drinking a 50% red wine, I'm hungover before I've even gone to bed.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. But I think also in our climate in South Africa, it makes a lot of sense because we have these long, hot summers. And then if you're always reaching for the white wine for this refreshment, then you end up like really missing your red wines by the end of it, you know? And so thirst was created to have red wine so that you could have red wine with this kind of refreshment built into it already. And so, you know, it makes it super versatile. You know, some days, you know, I take this home and I stick it in the fridge for like 10-15 minutes just to take it down to around 12-13 degrees, and it's as refreshing as, you know, the most refreshing Chenin to me. You know, you can sit out there, you know, and enjoy.
I absolutely agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah,
chilling red, light reds is a treat.
Yeah, absolutely. And just because we've got about 5 minutes left, I just want to talk through the last wine that we've got in the case that we put together. And just to answer the question that popped up there, you will be able to buy the case of wine via lifestyling.co.za, or you can just email us at orders@lifestyling.co.za. But the last one that's in the case, I've chosen one of my favorite reds of yours, which is also a little bit different because it's one of the few blends that you do, and this is a Rhone blend. I know some of the years you've had, you called it everything but the kitchen sink Rhones. You have 6 varietals, and I'm not sure if the latest vintage is all 6, or is it just 3? Do you want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, I think you've got the 2017 coming in the box.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I think we've got to take ourselves back to where we were in 2017. It was pretty much the absolute peak of the drought, and you know, I've got to tell you that the Swartland was probably hardest hit out of all the wine regions by the drought, and for, you know, basically 3 years it rained 100 or 150 millimeters per year there. So I mean, there are, even to these gnarly old bush vines, there's limits to what they can take. And you know, 2017 was a really tough year, and therefore we weren't able to even harvest any Grenache. We weren't even able to harvest any Carignan. Well, there's a little bit of Carignan in there, but far less than we would have had in other years.
Yeah,
but
so some of the vintages we're looking at, it's Syrah, Grenache, Cinsault, Carignan, Mourvedre, and Viognier, yeah?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So, you know, we've in 2017 we were able to sort of keep the core intact, and the core of Blackrock has always been Cinsault, Carignan, and Syrah. And then, you know, the other things that we add to this is, you know, Grenache and Mourvedre and Viognier, but the core is that. And you know what? It was actually very interesting to see what the core of Blackrock really is on its own, because I don't get a chance to see this kind of thing very often. Even as the guy that makes this wine, typically what we do with this wine is we co-ferment it. So that means you ferment all the grapes together in a single tank. So the Syrah will ripen, add it to the tank. The Carignan will come, the Cinsault will come, and everything just gets added to the top, so that you have a very seamless, very like a whole blend, you know, even in the grape form. So
as I don't get to fermenting it all together and then extracting the juices and tasting it and mixing it later. Correct.
So, you know, I mean, in the 12 years that I've been making this wine, it's very seldom that I've been able to see this core. And 2017 represents for me the real essence of what makes Blackrock. Yes, Grenache is important. Yes, Mourvedre is important as well, and so is the Viognier, but none more so than the core of it: Syrah, Carignan, and Cinsault.
And so, how would you describe the flavor profile of this? And food-wise, is it a good pairing with anything in particular?
Well, you know, it's a Rhone style red blend. So, I mean, it's always going to have a very strong spice component. We aim for a good mix of very dark and red berry flavors. And you know, there's a wildness about Blackrock that reflects the place where it comes from. It's kind of like the difference between a cultivated strawberry and a wild strawberry, you know, or beef versus venison. You know what I mean? It's got this wildness. And so I really like it with venison in particular. I really like it with things that aren't as polished, you know. Some rustic country food seems to really suit this. I had it in the winter this year with a cassoulet, and it was just it was beautiful in its simplicity.